I'm not an academic. I'm probably the antithesis of academia. I'm not Jewish. According to the detailed family history research that my wife has carried out, I can say that quite definitively. And I have no Jewish constituents. I come out of the trade union movement, and my family comes out of that movement, and out of that movement my family helped create the Labour Party when it was first formed. And when that happened, in the early 20th century, there were a lot of Jewish workers around. And in all parts of the country bar two, that's Manchester and Leeds, those Jewish workers were stopped by the left from participating in collective activities. And one of the offshoots of that was that by 1905, 1906, there were around 80 Jewish trade unions, for Jews only, trying to affiliate to the TUC, some managing to sneak through and get in. But that tells its own story of the nature of a group of people who refused at that time and now to give up one's own identity. What we're seeing today on the left isn't new. There is a general feeling on the left for the underdog as perceived in individual minds and against the overdog. That's not new. Indeed, when it comes to the viewpoint of the left on the state of Israel, for 20, 30 years, that was the view. Little plucky Israel. I was there at the meetings when it was said and said repeatedly, without a Jewish colleague or comrade anywhere in sight. And that perception has changed. That's a fact. And therefore we need to deal with that change. Because that means that that large group of generally ignorant, uninformed people who once would tend to sway on the side of their perceived underdog, which was Israel then, now will sway generally the other direction. But it isn't those people who organised and instigated issues such as the so-called boycott of Israeli universities, or the journalist boycott, or any other boycott. Because those people generally might have a vague view, but nothing more than that. I know the people who did and do. I know where they come from, and I have an advantage. You see, not generally moving in Jewish circles, not living in Jewish territory, not coming from anything other than probably as far away from a Jewish background as you could ever get. I hear things, and I've always heard things, and I listen, and I smell, and what I smell today from the organisers and the instigators, I smell the stink and whiff of overt, deliberate, calculated racism. Why are they so vindictively and viciously and paranoically anti-Jewish? Because they are. I give only the observation that in some way they find some comfort in their ignorance by presuming that the great conspiracy out there does exist, and it's their job to fight that conspiracy. And of course that conspiracy, by definition, must be based on power and wealth. And who owns the power and the wealth? Well, in the pamphlets of 1904 and 1905, it was stated unequivocally on the left that it was the Jews. In the pamphlets of 1934, 35, 36 on the left, it was stated unequivocally it was the Jews. These days, people talk more about racism, and therefore it's not stated. Because if people stated that, we would destroy their arguments in seconds. We would point to what's behind it and the mindset and the politics behind it, and they would have no support other than the tiny gaggle of racists who perpetrate those views. And therefore, these days, they're cleverer. These days, they've learnt the game. These days, they don't say the unspoken of what actually affects somewhere in the back of their mind the prejudice and racism that we have. That when we see racism, we challenge racism, because that's the only way that racism's ever been stopped before. Direct, personal, unequivocal challenges. And what that means is we challenge it in our own backyard. I've been in the Labour Party all my life. Been a trade unionist since the age of 17. My primary responsibility isn't in Parliament. It isn't at meetings like this. My primary responsibility are my organisations. To challenge, fight and defeat any form of racism in my organisations. In fighting battles like this, and I refer, for example, to the university teachers, a trade union whose influence in terms of employment terms declines by the year and now by the week, who are incapable of organising industrially, who don't have a base of membership, who come moaning and yelling and screaming every time there's a change in the institutions they work, precisely because they're generally bypassed when those changes are made, because of their irrelevance as a trade union. And because of that, it gives comfort to some to find other issues. It's an old problem. If you can't deal with the employer, find someone else to try and deal with, and then pretend you're doing your job. When in fact the job of a trade union should be guaranteeing the standards and quality of life of all the members. But of course, it's rather difficult if some of your members or potential members would be Jewish academics, or Jewish journalists, or Jewish transport and general workers, who may be less inclined to be represented by you and join you. But don't substitute the harrying and the challenging for the victory. The facts are, and we should get that confirmed in the next few months unequivocally, there is no academic boycott of the State of Israel. It doesn't exist, and it won't exist, because no academic institution in this country will do so. What journalist has chosen to boycott Israel? The answer is none, and none will. What factory has chosen to boycott Israel? The answer is there are none, and there will be none. So these so-called mass movements being built up are creating Pyrrhic victories by playing in the territory they know they can win, of playing with the wind whereby they play with resolutions and vague aspirations rather than anything hard and real. And so my message to you very strongly is, as well as fighting the battle of ideas, let's make sure we don't lose sight of the fact they have had and will have no real victories, because the vast majority of people in this country are anti-racist and abhor racism and will not stand by and allow racism to win. And we should remember at all times, therefore, we are the majority, and ensure in winning that we continue to isolate these racists and ensure everyone we come across, meet with and organise with understands that's what they are. We treat them as racists and we deal with them as racists.